U.S. President Donald Trump defended his economic priorities at a stop earlier today in Michigan, an economy that relies heavily on Canada and a state that could be hit hard by Trump's latest tariff threats. Last week, the U.S. administration levied a 50% tariff on billions of Canadian goods that they say will take effect on August 19th. For more on the impact of this next wave of tariff, Justin Wohlers is a professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan and joins me now. Justin, I subscribe to your newsletters. I was reading your stuff last week, and you also did an appearance where you talk about the fact that there's no such thing as a deal with the U.S. because the president doesn't keep his word. He makes a deal and then says something else needs to be added to it. With that in mind, how do you think Canada should navigate any of this when thinking about trying to make a trade deal? Yeah, I think let's talk about a different kind of deal, but it's the same economics, which is let's think about marriage. Now, you know, a lot of people when they get married, that's for better, for worse, in sickness and in health till death do us part. And what happens when you get married? You've got that guarantee that you and your partner are going to be together forever. So, you really mix your lives. You intermingle them. You find every way that you can support each other and enrich each other's lives. That's one model, and that's how we used to think about trade deals. Now, let me tell you about a different kind of bloke. There are some people out there who get married, then get divorced, then get married, and then see a Sheila out the side of their eye, and then get divorced, and then they get married, and they get divorced. And after they've been married a few times, certainly the next person that bloke meets is sort of going to realize this is not a bloke who keeps his promises. As a result, you're going to end up with a different sort of marriage. It's going to be a more transactional marriage. You're not going to get deeply embedded in each other's lives. And I think that's the problem. That's where we are with the president right now, which is Canada was serious about a deep marriage. That's what NAFTA was. And the good faith reenactment of Kuzma. The problem is that you're dating the wrong bloke right now, and has not shown that track record of reliability. He hasn't, but the deal largely has. I mean, Kuzma still defends Canada against the worst part of these tariffs because everything that is mostly Kuzma compliant is not applied. I guess how do you square those two when you think about we're supposed to be intensifying talks with the U.S. right now? How should those negotiators be thinking about how to approach this particular administration? Yeah. So, it's worth remembering the whole history of this. Recall, Kuzma was in pretty good shape when we entered the second Trump administration. After all, it was a deal that some bloke called Trump had negotiated. The first thing that Trump did was he put fentanyl tariffs on Canada despite the fact Canada doesn't really have much fentanyl. There was no carve out there for compliant goods. That was just we're going to whack you over the head. So, that was the first, if we want to go back to the marriage analogy, that's the first time the bloke cheats and he got caught. But you're right. He sort of came back and he sort of felt bad about it. And he said, I tell you what, we're going to whack you with all these tariffs except if you're Kuzma compliant. And by the way, they didn't do that for anyone else, right? They didn't do it for the Aussies or the South Koreans or the Brits. Just this nice carve-out. So, the Canadians were doing something really well until last week. This new 50% tariff. It's one that says, you know what, we're going to go at you even if it's Kuzma compliant. So, that's the thing that I think is a whole new phase in the trade war. Now, the funny thing, by the way, is the president then put a 10% tariff on every country around the world, including Canada, except for, once again, Kuzma matters. So, Kuzma matters except when it doesn't. So the question, I guess, is if these tariffs on August 19th go ahead, how should we respond? And you had a great analogy for this, that tariffs are like, what did you call it, rocks in the harbor? And it might mess up their stuff, but why make your argument, because I think it a valid one. This is, by the way, is not my argument. It belongs to the great Joan Robinson, who's one of the great unheralded geniuses of economics. Obviously, she's dead many decades now, but she basically said, look, if some other country puts rocks in their harbor, and I want to be clear on the analogy, when you put rocks in your harbor, you make it harder for boats to go in and out. You make it harder for trade. So rocks in the harbor is if the U.S. puts rocks in its harbor, that's what tariffs are. The U.S. put rocks in its harbor. If the U.S. puts rocks in its harbor, why would it make sense for Canada to put rocks in its harbor? The first people who are going to be hurt by Canada putting rocks in its harbor are the Canadians. So this is the economic argument that, yes, the president is attacking, but understanding that retaliation is going to hurt the Canadian people. And so the argument for trading is simply trading is good for Canadians on its face. I want to recognize that's an economic argument. Now, I've got a whole lot of friends who are a lot more political than me, and they think about global strategy and things like that. And they say things like, if every time I punch you in the mouth, you just stand there and take it, I'll just keep punching you in the mouth. So, that's the counter-argument. But I do want folks at home to really understand the argument for trade really does say it's in Canada's best interest even just to import even if it weren't able to export. So, to Prime Minister Carney, be thoughtful. Do you really want to punch the Canadians in the mouth? And I don't think we do a good enough job in this country of talking about the pain that has been caused to American companies and American workers by American tariffs. The opening of this bridge is great and it's fantastic news for Canadian trade, but the delay of it hurt American companies. The imposition of these new set of tariffs are going to hurt American companies. And yeah, some of it's hockey sticks, but some of it's cement that is crucially important to building the factories that Donald Trump says he wants to do. How important is it to let the damage of the tariffs happen and exist and just sort of point to it and say that's a problem here, not our response? Yeah, I do. Mate, I live very close to that bridge and my neighbors are a big part of Canadian-U.S. trade, and it really affects my part of Michigan. We're very close to the border. The hard issue is it is true the president is hurting Americans. The president is also hurting Canadians, and with your audience, I want to be very clear you are feeling the pain. But we are also feeling the pain because, for instance, the steel and aluminum tariffs make it so that U.S. factories are the only ones in the world that have to pay 50% more for steel and aluminum. It's actually really hurting not just American businesses, but also American consumers. Let me just say a couple of things. One, that the president is not winning the argument. The president is proceeding. But if you look at public opinion polls, he's lost the argument with the American people. They don't like his tariffs. 2, what do I advise Prime Minister Carney of anything? I think actually just laying out the facts even a little more clearly to the American people about the many ways they've lost. They've lost wine sales. They've lost tourism. They've lost higher education. They've lost we're on the cusp of losing some part of the auto sector that lies in the northern part of the United States. We got a pretty big dog in this fight. 2. And yet, even though Donald Trump is losing on a lot of those fronts, as you say, he's not changing his argument. And we've still got, I think it's 912 days left of Donald Trump in this term. What do we do? And there are people who say, wait it out. Make a deal with whoever's the president in 2028. That feels like a long time for, as you say, those companies that really are hurting as a result of this. Yeah, so I'm not really a political strategist. So what do you do beyond my pay grade? But look, one thing we have seen that works, and don't tell anyone south of the border I told you this, but if you give the president a press conference and he gets to announce something, but you never get around to signing a deal, he sort of tends to get bored and walk off and leave you alone. That's probably a pretty good idea here. The one thing you don't want to do is do a deal where Canada's doing a lot of costly investment up front, because I reckon if you do a deal, there's a pretty good chance that the president wakes up again and undoes the whole thing within a few weeks from here. So, the bloke likes pomp and ceremony. Give him the pomp and ceremony. But you might just have to wait it out for the next president. One of the things that keeps happening, and it happened again last night just before Asian markets opened up, is they announced they're going to continue with talks, and that brought the oil prices down. And it works to a certain extent, but it just adds to this volatility and these uncertainties. How much uncertainty on day one is bad? Uncertainty on I don't know how many days we're into the Iran war. It's a compounding figure. How difficult is that uncertainty weighing on the whole North American economy right now? Enormously so. Look, let's just bring it back to something light, because I heard a funny joke I want to share with you. You remember the old days of the taco trade? Trump always chickens out. They are now talking about nachos here. Never again can Hormuz open. Laughter. That's dark humor, because it really is harming, not in fact it harms the U.S. far less than many of our neighbors, not Canada, because we actually produce energy as does Canada, but consumers on both sides of the border are definitely feeling it at the pump right now. There's tremendous degree of uncertainty, but I think it's actually worse than that. I just want to remind you, as much as my friends north of the border are worried about these very, very big issues, south of the border, we're even worried about simpler things like can we and will we have free and fair elections. The stakes here are pretty big. Indeed, they are. And just before I let you go, given those stakes and given on the one hand, we've seen some progress. The bridge opened. Isn't that great? On the other hand, we're seeing more tariffs potentially added on August 19th. Just zoom out for me. What is your sense of optimism, sense of anxiety? Snorts, where are you at in terms of the Canada-US trade relationship? Oh, mate, one of the reasons you don't see any worry lines here is because I understood just how worried I would be. So I went and got Botox. And so, try and make long-term plans so the worrying doesn't get to you too much is sort of what I'm saying there. I think there's very, very real reasons to be concerned about the future of that relationship. I think some deep-level Canada has more options than some of us in the U.S. because, I think, Connie, the middle powers approach,